if you have night vision sitting here for $3,000 and thermal sitting here for $3,000, and you've got to take them out coyote hunting, which one are you going to take? With night vision, you might see an eyeball to give you a clue that there's something in the fence row, whereas with thermal, you swing over and you say, oh, I've got 2 deer walking through the fence row, and keep on trucking.
Okay.
Or I've got a coyote in the fence row, and there's another one behind it, and there's 2 more on the hill behind it, and they're working their way in. There's a lot of stuff that you can glean from thermal in a short amount of time.
How's it going, everybody? Today we're going to talk a little bit about hunting after the sun goes down in a legal fashion. Naturally, don't get us wrong there right off the bat. But night hunting for predators, coyotes especially. We have Matt across the table from us, Matt McHugh here, and he is a predator, calling, hunting expert. We actually had him on another podcast here, and depending on how these release, you may have heard it yet, or you may have yet to hear it, but it's another great one. Kind of more specific to the day stuff. But now, you said you do, 99% of your hunting now after the sun goes down? I mean, when it's dark out and you're traipsing around and time of day where you can't really see that much.
Yeah.
Yeah, well, with the naked eye. Some of the equipment you have here we'll get into, you can see quite a bit out there. But this is something I know. One, I think we wanted to get into some of the topic of, is it a whole different ball game when it gets to being nighttime in terms of hunting, especially, again, we'll kind of key on coyotes a lot here, but is it a whole different ball game from the daytime, or is it kind of the same thing, just different lighting conditions? And then also, I know a lot of people, I think, when they start talking about nighttime hunting, because of the limited visibility with just the naked eye, there's a lot of equipment out there that is designed to help you be able to see and then obviously make better shots. And that goes into everything from just artificial white light. You've got other kinds of light that are not necessarily visible to the naked eye, but visible under other pieces of equipment. You've got thermals, you've got night vision, and maybe even some other stuff out there that I might
different
be missing.
Colors of light, perhaps.
Yes. Yep. Exactly. Yeah. I think that's a lot of the stuff I've been interested in, because I would love to get out there during the evening time, the nighttime. I think one of the nice things about it is if you work during the day and you want to go hunting,
right?
Your best bet is then, especially during the wintertime, because it gets dark so darn fast up here. I mean, by 5 o'clock, it's basically pitch black almost.
Well, and if you're a family man, you got small kids, getting out during the day, or even on the weekend, right? That can be challenging. But maybe you put everybody to bed, read a couple stories, and everybody's asleep, and you can go out and
that's right,
hunt the rest of the night, and probably be running a little bit ragged the next day. But none the worse for wear.
Some clandestine operations while the kids are asleep. So Matt, really looking forward to hearing all the stuff that you have to say, because you do this so much. Now,
hold on, Jim, real quick here.
Yes.
Because a person may not have listened to the other podcast, where Matt introed himself, he gave probably a little bit more of a extended bio, which was fascinating. Yes. I'm just going to give the quick and dirty, and then people kind of have a little bit of a framework to go off of exactly who we're dealing with here.
That's a good point.
All right. Born and raised Wisconsin. Grew up hound hunting for coons, rabbits, and bears. Family man. Bachelor's in wildlife ecology. Okay. So we got a scientist here, basically. So 2-time world predator calling champion with his natural voice.
Mm-hmm.
So if you want to hear that, definitely tune back in. That's impressive. Reloader. You're a predator guide. You're doing helping out with problem predators. All sorts of stuff. You've been calling coyotes for 18 years. You're working with the Fox Pro team. So,
and as we learned, you actually listen to our podcast.
Yeah.
That's probably the most impressive fact on his resume, Jim. But anything important that I missed there, Matt?
No, that's plenty. Yep.
And I think one thing, like you said, Jim, we just did this entire podcast. I think it was like an hour and a half, but I'm telling you guys, it was a good one.
Oh, we didn't even get to everything.
And it was all on day hunting. And come to find out, Matt does most of his hunting at night now. So we're going to get into a lot of that. And maybe, at least to me, maybe a starting point there is why?
So coyote activity is a heck of a lot higher after dark in most areas and in most instances than it is in the daylight. So animals that are comfortable moving under the cover of darkness will throw inhibition to the wind a little bit quicker. You're going to see, I would say, 10 times more after dark with the proper equipment than you will in the daylight. So response to the call, your ability to learn from them and be humbled by them, and all those interactions that you have 10 times more of them in the same amount of time after dark. So it's a way to accelerate your learning program. But that's with proper equipment. There are some limitations to hunting at night, and some concerns that right off the bat need to be discussed. Safety is paramount. And, to be out there after dark, your sense is limited as well then too. And whether it's a bright moonlit night or it's a snowy night and there's maybe some light pollution from the nearby town and whatever that you're able to kind of work under, your visibility is limited. And when people are in the moment and you've got a coyote breaking cover coming across the field on the snow and you've got them in your crosshairs, you need to always be mindful of your target and what's beyond. And, you can't stress that enough, night hunting and hunting in general. But, you get tunnel vision inside of your scope and you're following across the field. And, is there a set of farm buildings on the backside of the section, or is there a hunting buddy of yours or his pickup truck or, whatever on the road there, or a pasture full of cattle that you're swinging across while you're chasing this coyote through the field, waiting for him to get into the ideal position or to stop for you. So that stuff, hunting after dark requires a lot of self-control, and that's where equipment comes into play. And, so you talked a little bit about and teased out a little bit of the, the light stuff. And then there's night vision options and thermal options. And, here in Wisconsin, we've got kind of a unique set of rules in where use of lights is only allowed at the point of kill. So the regs read that. And to the layman, that can mean a lot of different things. There can be a lot of gray in there where you have a geographic point on the map. Is that the point of kill? So I'm in position. I've walked there. I'm not scanning on the way. I'm not driving around out of the truck. I'm in position, ready to hunt, and I'm planning to kill something here. Is that the point of kill?
Oh, so you could be, theoretically, if you interpret it that way, like scanning with your light, but that's the point at which you're doing that scanning.
Right. Okay. It's a geographic point. Or is it the point that animal is being killed by you?
Like a point in time.
Right. Is that when you're taking your safety off? Or is that when you're breaking your trigger? Or is that when the bullet is entering the vitals and stopping the heartbeat? What is the point of kill? So it's a very poorly worded regulation. And it takes a fair bit of digging to get to what's the real definition, and that is you need to identify the animal to a species in open season prior to turning on your light.
Okay.
So in that open season where you're allowed to only night hunt for coon, fox, and coyote in Wisconsin, you have to be in those seasons. So part of the night hunting season is open to coyotes year-round. You can night hunt for raccoons, you can night hunt for fox, but they each have a season on them. So, at any point in there, you can inadvertently put yourself in a bad spot using lights. So lights in conjunction with a thermal monocular or a thermal scanner can be a really good way to get folks into it, get folks started with it. Other parts of the country where you're able to use light unrestricted, you can scan for eyeballs and try to pick them up. But here in Wisconsin, we've got issue with that. Until we see the animal and identify it to species in open season, we can't scan for them. So, and as specific as that is, and maybe as irresponsible as it is to have it worded that way, if I have, your dog coming out of your yard at me while I'm out there blowing a rabbit call in the field and turn my light on to see, oh, that's not a coyote, that's a house dog.
Yeah.
I'm scanning in possession of a firearm in closed season.
Oh.
If I have...
Because there is no season for house dogs.
Correct.
Okay.
And
goodness.
it's the responsible
Glad
thing.
we cleared that up, Jim.
Yeah.
Right. But it's the responsible thing to do to positively ID that animal before I point my rifle at it.
I would wholeheartedly agree.
Or before I point my shotgun at
with
it.
the canine thing.
Yes.
That you bring up.
So a German Shepherd, an Australian Shepherd, those pieces there, it requires self-control. And when somebody is in the moment and they're sitting there calling for coyotes and howling like coyotes and a coyote howls and whatever in the distance, your head is in that coyote game. And if it's a fox out of season, you're shining in possession of a firearm in closed season. If there are deer bedded up in a fence row and there's coyotes coming at you screaming and barking and yelling to tell you to leave, and they flush those deer out of the fence row and they get up off the fence row and come at you across the field, and you see that movement on the snow and turn your light on to identify them as deer, you're shining in possession of a firearm in closed season.
I see the...
yes.
Well, it just doesn't seem like a very practical rule. Is that the word for it? Or like, I get that the intent.
PC way.
I get the intent, kind of, maybe, but it just...
Is the intent that we just don't have a bunch of lights just at night shining around everywhere, or what? I mean,
no.
Or is it just that somebody? Is it one of those cases where somebody made a law and they weren't exactly intimately familiar with how everything worked? Not that that's ever happened before.
Buckshot. No, I think the justification for it initially, and it's been standing for a long time, was to try to close a loophole for somebody poaching a deer.
Right.
To be out there saying, well, no, I'm coyote hunting.
Yeah.
And the scary thing, when I had first kind of got involved in that debate was the warden's interpretation is, at the end of the day, what it comes down to. If there's a warden called out to the scene and his interpretation is that you had your light on something that wasn't a coyote or a fox or a coon, or were you able to scan to the south and click your light off and that was okay, and just spot check a thing, was that all right? Or, I know you're coyote hunting, you don't have to worry about it. So there's a lot of gray area left to the warden's interpretation, just like any law. Just like, that's the officer's interpretation at that time to, determine who gets a fine. So there's too much gray in that. And even the way that it's worded is unfair and irresponsible. So, to expect somebody to be out there calling, because they're worried about getting on the wrong side of the law with a light, using the moonlight, that really limits your ability to make a good positive ID. And there's been, horror stories here in the state of domestic dogs getting shot by somebody calling under moonlight, and they had reflective collars on, and you would have been able to see that if you were on the light, but you still would have been in violation turning a light on them because they weren't a coyote. But wild-looking canines coming into a rabbit distress call in the middle of the night, well, you're in the right, and somebody else is in the right, and the dog is caught in the middle. It's a bad situation. So,
interesting.
I urge everybody, if you are interested in night hunting, there is some investment to make with it to do it safely for that peace of mind and for just the ethics involved. And, there's some night vision options out there that can increase your ability to see, and those are amplified by infrared light and, the starlight scopes and things like that. If you've got a good moonlit night on the snow, you can see it quite a bit. And if you've got your infrared illuminator running, and depending on where you're hunting, you can utilize some of that stuff, you can see it quite a bit. But that infrared light is still an emitted light.
Okay.
So night vision, that infrared light and, a red beam or a white beam, those are all an emitted light. So you need to be really cautious and careful with that, and still only be using it at the point of kill.
Is Wisconsin the only state like that, or are there others that have unique light rules?
There are some that have some other unique ones. I would say ours is probably the most egregious.
Oh, okay. To put it lightly.
Yeah.
That's what I was going to say is, like, you're kind of putting this pickle, and not to pick on Wisconsin, maybe, I don't know. But it does seem pretty unique to this state. Every other place that I've lived where you can hunt coyotes at night, it just seems like you're able to use, I guess, a little bit more logic in the thinking of the use of the light.
Mm-hmm.
Well, and some of it is some of the other states worded as you need to be on foot.
Okay.
And some of the other states worded as you can use thermal, but you can't use lights, or whatever. And some of that stuff, to use thermal and not lights is kind of a kick in the pants for some of the guys that maybe can't afford to make that investment but still want to get out. Don't want to necessarily do it with the moonlight or whatever. But still, there's a stigma around night hunting that folks that don't do it or aren't engaged in it tend to fall very quickly to this idea that because we are night hunting, we're violating in some way. Mm-hmm. So, it's a closure of a loophole for somebody out there trying to shoot a deer. Is the way that it was built.
Right. And ultimately for a person like you, or I'd say I'd have to think the vast majority of people that they want a coyote hunt, they want a predator hunt, they want to do that at night. Your goal is to make that positive ID and make the most, ethical, fast, quick kill possible. Like that's your goal. And so taking some of those tools away,
or just making their use very convoluted and confusing.
Right. Yeah. And I think, people like us, it's like, you want to follow all the rules. Like you said, there's some gray area. There's some interpretation there. It's like, what do you mean by that?
Yeah.
Yep.
So you bring up too, like we've been talking about, is a lot of these things with lights. In the positive ID, that's such a huge thing when you're hunting at night.
Mm-hmm.
I know I've heard some. When I initially heard about night hunting, and I shouldn't even say like I heard about night hunting, but when I sort of like my interest was piqued in it, and I kind of assumed the first thing that you'd want to get is night vision. Like literally, the name says what you want to have, night vision. And so I started thinking like, well, that's the perfect thing to have.
Add to cart.
Add to cart, right? For $6,000 or whatever they are, upwards probably. But, and I thought, well, you can walk around, you can see everything. And then, when you see a coyote, you shoot it. Well, then I saw people, then a lot of people say, well, thermal. And thermal has its own unique advantages. And I've heard people say, well, actually, for hunting purposes, thermal is probably maybe even better than night vision. And then there's also just regular lights. Like I know some people just go out and they just got super bright, visible to the naked eye lights that they go out and use. And what are I guess if you were to describe all these, I don't know if I did a good enough job describing them, but have you used all these different various means out there? And then what are the pros and cons of each of them? And
how are you using them together?
Yeah,
sure. So I guess we'll start off on kind of the basic end of it with lights. So, other parts of the country where we're able to use lights, there's a big discussion and debate about light color and whether it's red or green or amber or white. From my experience and from my research, it is the intensity of the light that spooks them. It's not, and it's the quick introduction of that intense light that spooks them. It's not so much the color. Folks say, well, coyotes can't see red, so they have no idea that you're shining a light and it's invisible. They don't see red in terms of red. They see it as kind of a mustard color. But it's just striking their rods and cones a bit differently. But the color of the light is a personal preference thing. And it might come down to your setup if you're using day glass on your rifle with a rifle-mounted light. And there's a lot of really great options out there. And like Fox Pro had just come out with their gunfire series with the interchangeable lights. And this is one of the scanning lights where I've got red and I've got white and I've got green and I've got amber and I've got the ability to dim it, which is really big. And I can focus it to a tight spot and open it up and do a lot of fun things with it. And I can switch for positive ID to white with the press of a button from anywhere.
It's pretty cool.
So, that they've got some really neat stuff out there for the places where you can't hunt with thermal, or you can, do a lot of work with lights and scan with lights and that kind of thing. White light is really great for positive ID, especially with a decent piece of glass on there to be able to use your white light as night vision.
Get a little bit more, I suppose you can identify colors better, contrast better, and then stuff like that.
Yep. And the idea with the other frequencies of light, your red doesn't carry quite as far. It's not going to be, as intrusive either to your neighbors or to the animals while you're calling. And some of the idea with the scanning is you want to stay above the animal and kind of halo them a little bit,
right?
As you're scanning. So if you're looking for them to come bebopping out of a woodlot, and you're running your beam, your focused beam, or your diffused beam up a little ways, so that there is some diffused light falling down onto them, but you're kind of keeping that circle above the wood line as you're swinging your light beam. That's going to be enough to make their eyes reflect back at you.
Mm-hmm.
So that is your first indicator that you've got something there. And then, there's other cues that you can use with that to help you on your way to a positive ID, but aren't adequate to say that's precisely what I've got. They're based on eyeballs. But a fox or a bobcat have got shorter legs than a coyote. A fox kind of moves with happy feet and bounce in, but so do house cats and all kinds of other things. So that's going to be your first indicator that you've got something there. And or you can use thermal in conjunction with a light on your rifle to say, yep, I've got something coming up the fence row here. And a lower end thermal, you might just see a hot spot and not be able to make a positive ID through the grass or whatever, and then get on it, pick up the eyeballs in your night vision or your day glass with a light, and watch it come out into the open and get your positive ID that way. So there's a lot of ways to go about it, but light color is not anywhere near as important as the intensity. And as you're putting yourself in that coyote's shoes, responding to a sound stimulus in the middle of the night, there's yard lights and there's street lights and all kinds of stuff off in the distance that a small light on the hill isn't going to spook them.
Okay. I wouldn't have thought. That
if
makes
they're
sense.
standing in the beam of a spotlight, and it flicks on when they're 30 yards away, gone.
Yeah.
Surprise.
Yeah, exactly. And that sets up some of the...
Might as well just bring out the megaphone. Mr. Coyote, sir, please stop.
Well, and that's exactly it. And then that sets you up for a situation where you've got to be able to make an ethical kill quickly, to your point. So that's where some of the shotgun things come into play. And, you can do a lot of things with shotguns. There's a lot of tactical accessories and things that you can put, lights on the side of your fore end or clamp to the barrel or whatever you decide to do with that. And that you can pop up with a pressure switch or with a butt cap switch or whatever you want to do to get your quick positive ID, but you pretty well need to be ready to go.
Yep.
If you blast them with a tactical light, it's gone. So, other things that I've done in the past with the scanning stuff, very much a homespun idea, but we've got a extendable monopod here and a Picatinny rail that I could mount a scanning light to. So, now,
is that
with my hand on this and my rifle in the fork or my shotgun in the fork, I can track whatever I'm on using this beam of light on the monopod. It's always pointed in the right direction. So if I grab the shotgun and throw it up there quick, or grab a piece of day glass or something like that on a 223, without a light mounted on it and it's all set up for night hunting, I've got my night hunting piece to put in addition to my regular rifle or shotgun.
And a great support, too, for making your shot.
Yep, and depending on where you're hunting, if you're hunting in the woods or in the brush or in the cover, a lot of guys like to sit down and dig themselves in even at night. I like to be on my feet. I like to be mobile. I like to, if I need to pack up and move in a hurry to get over the hill and see if I can get an opportunity at them yet, or get across the road to the other side if I've got permission there, or even just swing around behind me. I can do a lot of that from my feet leaning up against a tree in the dark and be adequately camouflaged.
Yeah.
Okay.
So there's a lot of ways that you can adapt lights and things to your setup. And particularly if you're going to be hunting at night by yourself and you don't have somebody else holding that light, you only have so many hands. Right.
And that's like having two hands right there.
Yep. And even, to be holding a scanning light up like this and swinging for the whole night can be fatigue to the shoulder.
Sure, for sure.
And something like that, all I'm doing is rolling my wrist. So it it's an efficiency piece, but yeah. So I mean that kind of setup works really well for shotgunning and even rifle hunting, especially if you've got a tree to support instead of trying to sit off of a bipod or your swagger sticks and all that kind of stuff. You can just lean up against a tree and
nice.
Be ready to go with it. So there's a lot of ways that you can adapt this sport and make it fit you or your budget or your area or your style.
The nice thing, speaking of budget there, though, is that I think a lot of people, when they hear night hunting, like I did, they instantly go to night vision and thermal. So you're already talking 4 or 5 figures. Whereas you're discussing, I mean, the possibility to go out there at least with buying a light, you do a little homebrew monopod job like that, and you got your gun, even if it's a 12-gauge shotgun, and you can go out with something and still night hunt effectively without dropping just buku dollars.
Yep. And, for those that are just getting into it, for the educational aspects of it, but then also for positive ID and, the safety aspects of it, I would highly recommend that you get into shotgunning. So you might not be stacking up the numbers that guys with thermal units are, but you're going to learn a lot about the game. And, in the other podcast, we talked a little bit about some of the setups where, we've got a ditch or a travel corridor that is a very focusable spot to set your coyote's path into that stand. Building the stand off of that with your collar upwind, letting it blow to a gap or an opportune spot on that travel corridor for you to take them or for your partner to take them. And, set your shotgun shooter right on that ditch or right in that ditch or 10 yards downwind of that ditch, so that as that animal's cruising through, it's really easy to make a good positive ID.
Gotcha.
Yeah.
And shotgun is very effective at that range, and it's very safe in that instance. And you can utilize a light on a shotgun very quickly and be ready. So, that kind of stuff, it's a really good way to learn how to set the stands up, learn how to get ahead on that chessboard, and then beyond that, be able to build off of your experience and work your way up as you get a little bit deeper into the sport. And night hunting is not for everybody. It's colder, and there's needing to get up for work in the morning, or wrecking your weekend. Unless you're going to night hunt both weekends, you throw yourself into a huge mess for Sunday when the wife wants you to go, hang out with the in-laws or whatever the deal is,
Scared of the dark.
Scared of the dark. Yep. So, I would definitely recommend for those that are just getting into it to, find a way that you can adapt to your area and then what you can do safely. And get some coyotes under your belt, get some fox under your belt. Get a mental picture for what those things look like so that when a deer comes banging out into the field, your knee-jerk reaction isn't up and the safety off.
Yeah.
All of those things come with some experience, and, to get your foot wet, it's a really great place to start with shotguns.
And yeah, and we're talking about, getting into it, right? Like a lot of people already have a shotgun. You pointed out, Jim, you don't need to just like jump in and get all this crazy expensive gear. It's like a lot of your kit that you probably already have, maybe a few specialized pieces, including a light, that's going to be optimal for hunting at night, and give it a try.
Yeah.
Yep. Yeah, and when you get into looking at some of those lights, there's a lot of stuff out there that's tailored to pig hunting, or they're tactical lights that are flipped over into the hunting world because you can lock them on a quad rail or something. Put some thought into that purchase, and a really great place to start are the places that are built and driven and motivated by predator hunting. So something like Fox Pro, where we've got light options that you can open them up, close them down, dim them, be able to switch into white light at the press of a button to get your positive ID regardless of what color you're in. Those kinds of things are set up around safety and around getting that good positive ID and being able to do it quickly and efficiently because you don't have a lot of time while they're out in front of you. So look to those places where things are thought out for you already, and having the light options that go, white, red, and infrared. And then, if you're going to start there and then you're going to do some red light hunting or whatever, that's fine. If you're going to upgrade from that into night vision, now you've got a really great IR illuminator, also rifle mounted or hand scan. But the rifle mounted stuff, the shotgun mounted stuff is great. It eliminates the need for the extra hand, and you can keep things steady and keep them with your sight picture and, move around and make sure that you get your good positive ID and you're not trying to shoot off of your wrist or, whatever with the gun. So, I think some of that stuff through before you jump into that purchase, and, likely for a couple of $100 or, $500, you can get yourself set up well, and you haven't got to have a lot invested in your camo, and you haven't got to have a lot invested in your shotgun, and you haven't got to have a lot invested in, anything other than gas and time.
Right.
So, you can shorten your learning curve quite a bit when you get down in the ditches with them and watch the way they respond to those calls. And hunting with a partner is a great way to start too, and or somebody that's got some experience doing it that's happy to take you under their wing. And then doing those partner setups, those buddy setups where, if you get into some hand calls or get into some diaphragm calls, and you're not ready to take the leap and get into a fancy electronic caller, there's ways to adapt those setups with buddy calling. If you know they're going to end up downwind, whether it's daytime or nighttime, they're either going to end up on top of the call or they're going to end up making a downwind circle. So you don't have to see the whole world. You haven't got to be popping flares and all that kind of stuff so you can see 600 yards out there if you haven't got the investment made. Focus on the travel corridors. Focus on those pinch points or that knob or that piece of high ground downwind that we know they're going to go to. So it takes some planning and some thought to go into some of that stuff. But that's not to say that you can't just go plop down on the rock pile, blow on a rabbit call, and kill a couple coyotes a year. It just depends on how deep you want to get into it and how successful you're looking to get at it. And is it just on your 40, or is it something where you want to take it countywide and make a name for yourself? So a lot of different ways to build it out. So moving out of the night vision or moving out of the lights into the night vision stuff. Yeah, night vision, as awesome as it is, and there's places where you can really make great use of it. Hog hunting in Texas and things like that, where you can, and even coyote hunting and predator hunting, other places where you're driving around with your lights off under night vision, you can see through the glass and be dark and stealthy and cruising in there on your bad boy buggy or whatever you want to do and get in nice and close and tight. Again, you need to have those eyeballs at a distance to pick up the animal. And limitations on night vision, it's a couple hundred yards. And then with that, you're looking, with an IR illuminator, ideally, you're now looking through a beam of light. You've got that tunnel that you can see well, and the rest of the night is the night. So you've got to have a really good basis for your safe fields of fire. And if I know that there's buildings over here, I might set myself in position to where I'm going to swing my rifle across my periphery and smack into this tree before I make it into an unsafe shooting area. Yeah. So little things like that can help you with some of that, and be thinking that stuff out, be setting that stuff out, or even hunting off the tripods like we've got back here. I might set myself up to where if I know I've got something in the distance that I see on the aerial photo, or I can see smoke rising out of the chimney through my thermal scope or whatever, I'll set the caller in line with that. So I've got that reference to know I'm not going to shoot anything in the direction of the call. And typically, you have plenty of opportunity to catch the coyotes before they end up with their nose on the collar.
Gotcha.
Or you set yourself up that way. But I might also use a little thing like my tripod legs. So if I'm scanning off of that tripod with my rifle and I have to step over a tripod leg to get a shot, I know I'm out of my safe field of fire. Okay. So, little things like that can help you, but certainly the best thing you can do is be familiar with the area and, use really great equipment to know your target and what's beyond. If you know that there's nothing back there for miles and you're shooting into a hill and you've got a good safe backdrop to shoot, that, those are stands that you can have a little more freedom on.
Yeah.
I was going to say, like, probably either scouting during the day, even if you plan on hunting at night, could be pretty handy.
Yep. Mm-hmm. Yeah, and new construction isn't always on your aerial photos if that's all you got to go off of.
There you go.
One of the things, speaking equipment-wise specifically with night vision is it seems like there are there's a couple of drawbacks to it, and you kind of alluded to a few of them, but, I feel like one is, the expense and everything that goes into it. And there's clip-on night vision devices. So then there's also binocular devices and monocular devices that would then go helmet-mounted. And if you're going that route, you're talking about you got to get a helmet, and maybe you just go with the bump helmet so it's not some full-on ballistic style thing. Then you got to figure out what mount you're going to get for the helmet. Then you got to figure out, how your device clips into that. And then you're talking about counterweights on the back of your helmet if you want to be using it for a long extended period of time and not have neck fatigue. There's other cool tactical stuff you can stick on your helmet if you're feeling crazy. But then IR illuminators are good to have, like you mentioned. And if you are the helmet-mounted route, I don't always think it's as intuitive. Tell me if I'm wrong, because you have more experience with this stuff than I do. From what I've gathered, it's not always as intuitive to use your actual sight that you might have mounted on top of your rifle scope as it would be to get a laser or something like that would work in conjunction with the night vision. And then you can just hold your rifle at more of a low ready-ish style position, not completely low ready pointing at the ground, but not hold it up to your eye, and then you use a laser. And then that has its own limitations because the laser is zeroed. And it's not just like your bullet that comes out of your rifle isn't a laser. It has ballistics and everything. So then you're kind of limiting your distance possibly. And it can get kind of into a little bit of a quagmire of all kinds of different things to consider, right?
Yes, indeed. And, like here in Wisconsin, it's illegal to hunt with laser. So,
okay, right.
Oh, okay.
So like to have a red dot sight on a pistol or something to shoot a coon out of a tree is illegal unless you're a disabled hunter. So that's
like a laser, like a visible beam of light type sight.
Yeah, that's what I'm talking about.
Okay, yeah.
Well, and in your instance, an IR laser, mounted on the forend of an AR that you're using in conjunction with nods is that same thing.
Yeah, a laser that's projected out from the gun.
Yes.
Gotcha.
Okay. Yeah.
And there's a lot of stuff that goes into that, and then eye fatigue and headaches and that kind of thing if you're trying to run binos and that kind of stuff. So with that, then too, it's handier more so for the walking in and walking out. Than a thermal would be, or trying to run a headlamp or whatever to walk in and walk out. If you're trying to maintain a level of stealth beyond stumbling over brush and trees and stuff on your way in, or banging your aluminum pieces into stuff and whatever.
Because a thermal might not necessarily show like a pothole you're about to walk up on, like night vision would.
Yep. So there's drawbacks on both of those, and I would say, if we focus more on the on-stand calling stuff in and looking at that as far as our pros and cons to build off of, like the animals coming in under night vision, if you have the starlight scope and no infrared illuminator, or they're out on the snow with no beam of light going at them, you're less likely to pick up the eyes. I mean, you'll be able to see them once they break cover and get out in the open. And running that IR, once you see them out there, is going to help you with your positive ID. It can give you a much cleaner image of the animal in a lot of instances than what thermal will as you're looking at the heat signature versus the actual image. So that kind of stuff can be a drawback for new shooters or new night hunters trying to get a good positive ID with, we'll say, lower end night vision stuff. There's a lot of limitations on that, and if you're going to White Foss or Gen 3 Plus stuff, you're spending a pretty good amount of money.
Yeah.
Whereas some of the digital night vision options that are out there are great for 50 yards, 100 yards, things like that, and not a terrible place for folks to start. But again, just be very, very mindful of your target and what's beyond. Mm-hmm. Now, getting into the upper end of the night vision spectrum and then into the thermal world there, and there's some pretty affordable options in the thermal market available on the civilian side of things, and really great quality stuff even. on the lower end side, where if you have night vision sitting here for $3,000 and thermal sitting here for $3,000, and you've got to take them out coyote hunting, which one are you going to take? With night vision, you might see an eyeball to give you a clue that there's something in the fence row. They come out onto the field. You might pick them up if they're looking at you versus looking at the caller, that kind of stuff. Or if you're setting up with the caller away from you a ways or right on top of you, that kind of stuff makes a little bit of a difference. But if they're in the brush and you're able to say, I've got eyeballs out there. Something. Are you going to change your calling up? Are you going to switch the sounds up and try to test it to see if it's a predator?
Okay.
Throw some kisses out there if it's if quiet part of your stand, or throw some coyote vocals and see if you yank it, or throw some fox vocals and see if you yank it. So you're testing it a little bit to see what it is until you can get a real good look at it. Whereas with thermal, you swing over and you say, oh, I've got 2 deer walking through the fence row, and keep on trucking.
Okay.
Or I've got a coyote in the fence row, and there's another one behind it, and there's 2 more on the hill behind it, and they're working their way in, and that one just looked back over its left shoulder, so that's telling me that their partner is probably back in the brush there on its way out onto the stand or whatever. So there's a lot of stuff that you can glean from thermal in a short amount of time, whipping around, that you're going to have to sit and study, and then to know, that where you're testing them to see what you're going to do, you're interrupting the flow of everything else that you've got going. It can take more time out of your stand and that kind of thing. Plus, I'm able to see the smoke rising out of the chimney on the skyline and know that there's a house back there. I'm able to see cattle out in the pasture at 1,000 yards and know that there's cows out there. Hunting in more open country, you can see coyotes on the other side of the road, either coming in or coming up to the territorial boundary and standing their ground to know maybe I make my next stand across the road. Or I don't want to leave yet because I've got a pair coming across the field at me.
Yeah.
I'm not going to walk out and pick up my caller. So you're not leaving as much on the table when you walk out to the truck. You don't have anything weighing on your mind. Man, if I had sat 5 more minutes, I don't know what would have happened,
Right.
Where with thermal, you have a clear conscience, I gave it my 15, 20 minutes. It's not that I couldn't have called something in after that, but I couldn't see anything for 1,000 yards in any direction, curious about what I was doing.
Right.
I can confidently pack up and leave.
Right. And that's like a time management thing too.
It is.
You're kind of like hedging your bets of, okay, generally I'm going to get a response or see something in X amount of time. Like you said, something could come in a half hour later.
Yep.
Beyond that, but you might be already on your next stand and called in a double, and bam,
Yep. But the safety side of it for me is huge. Every bullet you shoot has got a lawyer attached to it, whether it's 2:00 in the morning or it's 2:00 in the afternoon. And if you shoot somebody's cow, that's a big deal. And if you shoot somebody's house, that's a big deal. And to be able to see everything, with the night vision, as I said, you got a limitation of a couple hundred yards, ideal conditions, maybe 300, that you'd be able to get a good look at your surroundings and eyeballs and all that kind of stuff out there. But with the thermal, I can see a cattle full of pasture in my backdrop and know that I have to get that coyote to clear. Or if it's hogs or whatever you're doing, if you get into a situation where you bust up a triple and stuff's flying all over the place and adrenaline's up and whatever, in a night vision situation, you might not see anything behind it or think that you're still in the clear, but, I'm swinging across and, sure enough, there's a pickup parked on the road behind mine a quarter mile, and I'm right over the top of that guy's truck with my safety off and my finger on the trigger pulling the slack out, and it's safer, and I can see more at night with a thermal scope than you can in the daytime with your naked eye out of your deer stand.
Yeah,
hands down.
I mean, night vision really it helps you see better what's still pretty uncertain, whereas a thermal is literally, it's doing a great deal of work for you to be like, undoubtedly there's something hot over there that's probably alive, or probably either you should shoot or you shouldn't.
Yep. And you are able, with the equipment that's available now in thermal equipment, to make excellent positive ID. And things where, I get questions from new thermal hunters and stuff all the time asking me, like, how can you tell the difference between a wolf and a coyote coming in? And when you're looking through night vision, or you're looking through a thermal scope, or you're looking through, day glass even, in an open field situation, or even around trees, sometimes it can be difficult to get depth perception. It's gone when you're looking at something like this. You have no depth perception. So you've got to go on a lot of other cues to get your positive ID. And, things like the difference between a fox, a coyote, and a wolf, from a still image of that animal sitting on the edge of a field, it's really difficult to discern exactly what that is, to say fox, coyote, wolf, German shepherd, whatever. Mm-hmm. So that's where self-control comes back into play. And even at a distance or with some grass around it or whatever, it could be a bobcat. It could be a lot of things. So with it just sitting there and seeing that heat signature, it can be difficult at your first grab to be able to discern exactly what it is. Or if you just got a head and ears in the grass looking at you, is it a fawn?
Right.
Is it a doe? So, or even is it a buck? The horns, the antlers, hold heat in velvet, but they don't hold heat in the wintertime. So you've got to have a good contrasting background or a really, really sensitive scope to be able to see a rack on a buck. Otherwise, they all look like does out there. So, it's a neat piece of equipment to play with, but yeah, when they're sitting still, it can be really difficult to discern a positive ID. When they get up and move, then, in my head, I see a lot of coyotes in there, so I base everything else off a coyote. So a fox has got short legs and they bounce and they've got happy feet when they're coming in. Longer, more flowy body when they're running. You can't typically see the whole tail unless there's a good contrasting background, because there's a little whip of meat and bone in there that is the tailbone. The rest of it's just fur.
Okay.
So there's not a lot of heat being held.
Yeah.
Depending on what you have your contrast settings at and all that kind of thing. Now, a coyote, in my head, I've got the legs in proportion to the body, and they move very efficiently. And a wolf, in contrast to that, now you've got heavier limbs. You've got blockier forelimbs, blockier features. And when they move much heavier. Where a coyote is, very efficient in its means of operation and running. A wolf moves more labored because their limbs are more labored, and they've got bigger feet and heavier forelimbs, and they're, they run, like a show horse is, flipping its feet forward and things like that, depending on the breed. Anyway, so they have distinct characteristics in their movements, and the physical characteristics of the animals while they're moving, but then there's the German shepherd piece that everybody should be thinking about when you're out there night hunting. Now, when you have a doubt in your mind, let them come to the call. A German shepherd is not going to take off when they smell man scent in the way that a coyote or a wolf or a fox is going to react to man scent out there on that collar or crossing your boot tracks. So if you have a doubt in your mind, and even if you have a doubt in your mind beyond that, you don't take the shot. Utilize that self-control. But that can be a big thing to help you with that. Shut your call down to a low volume and coax them all the way in, rather than take them at 150 and see what they do in response to man scent out there if you have a doubt.
That's a good point.
Yeah. And a German shepherd's going to sit out there and wag and, come back at you, or maybe it's a lab or, whatever, if your equipment isn't such that you're able to say what breed it is out there, but it could be something other than a coyote. See what it does. Or does it come back your boot tracks tracking you, looking for you, versus and getting, So it's a very different response out there with a domestic canine.
Is that where having kind of multiple tools with you can be a benefit too? Like,
yes.
Oh man, I can't make it out with my thermal, and like you said, there's some phenomenal thermal optics out there, but some are better than others, or whatever you're using, to have that light.
Or it's
to get
like
that.
not everyone has $10,000 laying around to buy those things.
Oh yeah, that part, Jim.
So sometimes I know you like nice things, Mark. So sometimes you forget.
I do, but I'm probably still in the good flashlight category at this point.
Yes. So night vision in conjunction with a thermal on stand can be a huge help to you.
Okay.
And to be scanning with thermal and be able to say, definitely, I can pack up, there's nothing coming. versus, there's something coming. Now it hits the open field, and I'm going to transition over to night vision on my rifle. That's where I'm making my positive ID. That's where I'm getting my shot off once they break cover and get out into the open. I wouldn't necessarily recommend that you reverse that and be scanning with night vision and shooting in thermal. It's probably not a better option than shooting in night vision and scanning in thermal.
Okay, yeah. I was about to ask, what do you think is easiest to shoot with? Let's say you don't have both night vision and both thermal, and you're only going to be able to invest in one.
Yep.
Which would you invest with? And then when it, including all the scanning and everything necessary, but then I'm also curious when it comes to taking the shot, how you would take the shot with that one that you have.
So if you only have one unit,
and we're assuming that if you only have one unit, then you also have like a light, though, like a visible light.
Oh, okay. So like if I just had this one thermal unit, and this is a rifle scope, but I use it as a scanner, and it can be a rifle scope, it can be a lot of things. But if I only have this unit to use, it's not something I would recommend to scan with it and then have it marked on the top of your pick rail to set this on and lock it in there quick to try to get a shot off. It's not terribly functional.
Okay.
The other thing too is it smart? Depending on where you are you hunting in a group? Are you hunting with buddies, or are there a lot of bad zones around that you can't be shooting into for you to be scanning your horizon and scanning your periphery with the rifle?
Oh, sure.
Oh, yeah, absolutely.
So the tripods make it easier to scan from a standing position and that kind of thing. And when I take my clients out, they've got a field of fire that they're working in, scanning in a safe direction. I stand behind them with my scanner and whip 360 the whole time I'm calling. And then when something's coming, I can redirect them, pick them up, move them, get them all aligned safely so we can shoot past each other and that kind of stuff. So, if you had a light and a thermal, we'll say, so a visible light, and you could only buy the one piece night vision or thermal, I would say thermal is going to be a better asset for you out there. I would probably put the light on the gun and the thermal in my hand.
Oh, and then when it actually came down to the shot, you would shoot with visible light and just like some sort of sight on top.
Yep. So if I've got I've got day glass on the top of my rifle, and I put a light with that. I'm watching that animal coming in the thermal, from beside my tripod. I've got my scanner up to my eye, and I'm watching that animal coming out onto the field, getting into position, closing the distance, 150 yards, 200 yards. I then put this thing down in the lanyard, grab my rifle, get it about where I want it, safety off, get myself prepared, ready to go, click the light on, be ready to take them. Because if it's a quick blast of light versus a slowly introduced light, if you can slowly introduce that light, you can transition way earlier than that. You've got your positive ID made legally here in Wisconsin and other places too. Slowly introduce that light under your day glass and be ready to take the shot. But you know where they're coming from. You're prepared for it. You're ready for it. That kind of thing based on having the thermal in your hand.
Yeah. Now on that setup there, is that actually a thermal mounted up on that one?
Yeah.
Okay.
Yep.
Got it.
Yep. So, a couple of different directions you can go with the thermal stuff too. Rangefinders are pretty awesome to have built into your thermal scope because it's as I said, you have no depth perception once you get into that scope and get looking. Right. So it can also help you with positive ID in that instance where I've got a wild-looking canine sitting on the edge of the field. Is it a fox, a wolf, coyote? Being able to say that, a fox at 60 looks like a coyote at 120 looks like a wolf at 200 sitting still on the edge of that field without good depth perception. So having a rangefinder built in, and there's a couple of different units out there that you can tie a rangefinder to, this one being all internal, it gives me a readout right in the screen, and I've got my reticle set up with a scaling reticle to be able to hit a hash mark, give me a quick drop chart, and run with it. Same kind of thing with that without the rangefinder, but I've got a rangefinder in my scanner, so I'm able to bring that to play then and say, yep, what's that? 310. Let it rip.
Gotcha.
So some of that stuff can help. When it comes down to the shooting piece of it, though, setting zero, that's one thing that guys don't put a whole lot of thought into when it comes to the night stuff, and even some hunting in general. But one thing that I really preach a lot of is setting up your point blank zeros.
Yeah.
So with a 243 like that up there, I'm running fast and flat. So, I can take a look at that, put it into my forward off, and say I've got, 2.9 inches above bore, and I've got my velocity, and I've got my BC, and I've got everything there tied. Now, a coyote with fur on it's about 9 inches deep. You take the fur off, you got about 7 inches there, roughly. I don't want to hit the top, and I don't want to hit the bottom. I want to be in the vitals. So now I'm working with a 5-inch box, and that's my happy place on the side of the vitals on the coyote. So I want to set my zero up to where I'm never outside of that 5-inch box in my arc, and that allows me to shoot a 275-yard zero for that thing, still be dead holding to 300.
Okay.
And at night, heat of the moment, even daytime calling, heat of the moment stuff, you're not, trying to range and get back in your gun and that kind of thing. This allows me to do it in the optic, and pick a hash if it's deep, but inside of 310, 320, dead hold.
Okay.
So where is that one zeroed then?
That's a 275-yard zero. So I'm never going to be more than 1.5 inches or thereabouts above the line of sight to come out of the top of the box, and I'm not going to be falling out of the bottom of the box within that distance.
Okay.
Gotcha.
So, all right. So you're zeroed at, because I hear so many people word these things differently. Are you zeroed at 275 yards, or you're zeroed at 75 yards with the bullet then going up high and then coming back down right at about 200?
You're crossing the line of sight twice. So initially crossing the line of sight at 72 yards.
Okay,
68, 70, right. Whatever. Crossing through the line of sight. I never come more than 1.5 inches over the top, and I fall back onto that line of sight at 275.
Okay.
And then I'm still within this 5-inch box, then out to 310, 320.
Sweet. Okay.
Yep.
Makes perfect sense now.
So, in most of your calling scenarios, you're bringing them in well within, those confines.
I was going to say, that's got to have you covered pretty good.
Oh, yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah. And, so some of that is dependent on caliber choice and bullet weight and that kind of thing. So, you're kind of dummy proofing a lot of that to just make it point and pull for the vast majority of that stand. And then, we touched a little bit on caliber choice. One thing, especially for night hunting and, predator hunting in general, is proper bullet choice. Right now we're in the midst of this ammo shortage, and folks are having a hard time getting their hands on the right stuff for the job. They still want to go out and participate, or they got a planned hunt out west with buddies and whatever, and having a hard time finding the right ammo for their varmint rifle. And they're able to find something for their 300 blackout, 180 grain FMJs or round nose or whatever to go out and shoot coyotes with. It's not the thing to do. It's not an ethical thing, likely, to zip a full metal jacket through them, let them run for a day,
right?
Before they tip over, and it's just beyond that. Then you're likely going to be doing some extra shooting, or if you miss and it skips off something else, you don't know where that bullet's going to go. Making sure again that good safe direction to shoot is first and foremost, but you can back that up with proper bullet choice. And one of the neat things with varmint bullets is that they're quick fragmenting. So if you try to shoot through grass with it, it's going to tear apart and frag. If you miss and hit frozen dirt, it's going to frag. If you miss and hit a tree branch, it's going to frag, or a rock, it's going to frag. Or ideally, you hit your target with it and it frags, and it delivers that whole punch of kinetic energy quickly, ethically dispatches them, and ideally is fur friendly too. That it's not going to exit the second side.
Right.
Not exactly brush busting.
No. But that could be a good thing in this case.
Absolutely.
Yep.
What? And so what? What grain bullet are you pushing out of that? And I think sometimes people hear, 243. That's an old cartridge. People don't use that anymore. And
I think they only think that because it's not a metric designation.
Right. It's the
anything that's not 6, 6, 5, 7, 8, whatever.
Right.
Well, I guess your 7s and your 8s, people might, I don't know, for whatever reason, it's like, oh, if it's not 6 or 6.5, it's old.
Which, and you and Ryan did that podcast. The 243 it's the OG 6.
That's what it is.
What type? So let's just talk about that for a second. What types of velocities are you getting with that cartridge, and maybe what bullet are you shooting?
Look at you, Mark. You can't help but talk about cartridges now.
That's all right.
There's just too many to talk about. But I think, you look at like, we were talking about this before the podcast, but a cartridge might be better suited for delivering a lighter bullet, versus maybe a heavier bullet. So why did you choose the 243? And I guess what are you pushing out of that thing?
So I'm running a 65 grain VMAX. I've played with 75 grain VMAX as well, and some pretty scorching velocities, 37 plus, with the 65s out of 24-inch pipe there, and that affords me a very flat trajectory.
Yeah.
And a lot of punch. And like I said, the vast majority of the hunting that we're doing is fairly short range stuff. I also have a 6 Creed that I'm playing with, and different powder. Load D came out the same, and actually showing more pressure on the 6 Creed than what I am in the 243. Same bullet, and boils down to the same velocity. So, like Mark was saying, we've got a lot of calibers out there to choose from, and varmint hunting and varmint rifles have always been a pretty good spot to set wildcats in when people are looking to push things a little faster and that kind of stuff in your shorter action cartridges. But it may not be the best option. If you're set up with something out of the Creedmoor family that's built and designed around sending a heavy for caliber high BC rock, that may not be the best suited varmint bullet. Where something in that same 6mm platform I can run down to 55, 58, and then everywhere in between. And so you've got to find a good balance for you and your style and what you like. But you can do an awful lot of predator damage with a 223 as well. And there's nothing against it. And I'm a pretty big proponent of the 243 myself, but I've also, my rifles are set. I got 22 250 and all that kind of stuff. They're great varmint calibers. They're superb. And I might be eking out just a little bit more with a 243, but at the end of the day, you have to go buy a new varmint rifle because you got a 22 250 and you want a 243, and it's not necessary for the game, but how these things work. But yeah. So when you and it's we talked a little bit earlier too about the reloading side. These thermal scopes that we're using aren't as precise as day glass.
Yep.
So I tried
because they're using all digital readouts and digital reticle, yeah.
Yep, and you're picking a pixel as your 0 point and that kind of thing. So, you want to do everything that you can prior to throwing night vision on or throwing thermal on. And even night lights to get your rifle shooting well, or get your shotgun shooting well. Test patterns and, do some load D or test 5, 6, 7 different boxes of ammo or different flavors of ammo until you get to something that your rifle likes well. And then you're building off of a half MOA group, or you're building off of a 1 MOA group before you put this on there and be less precise. If your rifle's shooting a 3-inch group at 100 yards and you throw this on there, you're going to open things up a fair bit.
Yeah, it ain't getting any better.
Right.
And especially when you're talking about potentially getting a little bit of target panic and whatnot, and you add that into the mix.
Oh, the human element, Jim, would never come into play.
You had, speaking of accuracy and whatnot, so you shoot a lot off tripods. Now, the neat thing, like you mentioned earlier on, that night hunting affords you is the fact that you can be a little bit more in the open. You don't have to worry so much about skylining yourself or something like that. You can be standing off a tripod, which offers you a super stable platform. Even probably not far from the truck either if you got to run back and grab something, I suppose. But anyway, utilizing that tripod, how do you utilize it? I mean,
sure.
People know obviously, you shoot off it, right? But it's not always as simple as just stick gun on and shoot.
Right. One thing I wanted to cover real quick before we breezed past it was the skyline piece. You still can be skylined if you take high ground. Be mindful the coyotes are coming in underneath you, looking up at you. You can still see a tree against the night sky, and
good point.
That stuff is still there. Be mindful of that, but you can get away with a little bit more after dark. Certainly. But yeah, so shooting off the tripods. I set my stuff up differently, and even daytime calling. I've got a Area 419 rail on the bottom of this to lock on and be able to run in the daytime if I'm using tall grass as my cover or that kind of stuff. But beyond that, I like to utilize my sling in a real quick and dirty fashion here, where I'm doing scanning, where some guys don't have that option or whatever. They might be using a light or whatever, but my rifle sits on this tripod pointed in a safe direction, safety on, for 90% of the night. And I'm doing my calling and scanning, and then I transition over once they're onto the field or once they break cover and they're coming in. I transition back over to the rifle then. So at that point, some of the ways that guys shoot off of tripods is to get down, really bear into it, put a lot of weight down on it, and you can. And there's tripods out there certainly that can take that kind of weight, and ball heads that can take that kind of weight and stress.
We've got one now. It's called the Radiant Carbon. Just a little plug. Anyway,
so I do want to see that before I take off.
Yeah, for sure.
But I typically instruct folks too, and myself as well, practice just letting the ball head do the work. And I'm running varmint rifles as well, so that's a piece of it. And this big canoe paddle here is about 18 pounds by itself, and I'm shooting a lightweight bullet. There's not a lot of recoil involved, and the suppressor helps with some of that too, and it's tied to the ground with the tripod and all that stuff. So I don't have to worry a whole lot about that rifle bucking back and kicking me and blowing me off target. I want to use whatever I have at my disposal, and I use my sling, and I'm right-handed. Left-hand support hand, I always keep my sling on the left side of the tripod, and wherever I am around this tripod, I can grab onto this leg, grab onto this leg, grab onto the stem in the middle, do whatever I need to do to get nice and steady, and I'm creating some triangles there and making a good stable platform beyond this 77-pound ball head that's holding my rifle there. So, I can do a lot of things with it, but I urge folks to, kind of stay loose on it.
Yeah.
And shoot with an open hand. Utilize some of the stuff that our friends over in PRS are building for us. These vertical grips and aftermarket triggers and ARCA attachments and ARCA rails and all that kind of stuff that we can adapt to these tripods really easily to use for any number of hunting pursuits. But certainly what we're doing after dark night hunting is really handy. And it's light, it's quick, I can pick it up, bang it around, and get to a different position to shoot, or I can step around it, or if I'm hunting with a buddy, I can pick it up and move it around him, and make sure we're maintaining good, safe fields of fire. I'm not going to shoot his elbow off or anything stupid like that. So a lot of ways to utilize the equipment, and just something quick and dirty and simple like this locks me in really steady to where I can hold and shoot inch and a half groups at 275 when I zero this thing on a hand warmer really easily.
Didn't you have a different kind of a setup slightly than the sling with the AR-10 that you had?
I do.
Man, I'm looking at that, though. I'm sure there's a lot of ways to skin a cat, but that does look super stable in the way you are enlisting, the assistance of that sling, man. Just fast, versatile, easy to move, manipulate.
Yeah. Oh, this is an AR-10. My fault. This is a different bolt gun. This is a cute little gun. I like this thing.
So this is a REM 700, again in 243, and I've got a rat cut in here that I can lock into my ARCA rail there in this MPA chassis. And I get it set up. I want it to kind of be at a balance point on there, so I'm not fighting it one way or the other. But I lock that into the tripod, and then I've got this big gaudy broom handle on the front. But I can brace my wrist into the ball head in the tripod here and get a grip on the fore end, and also maintain a very, very stable shooting position.
That's pretty solid. And when you first pulled it out and I saw a broom handle on the end of a bolt gun, I was like, we might need to get a different guest. But it makes a ton of sense.
Making judgments on appearance, Jim.
I'm not
okay.
But yeah, so
no, actually, it makes a lot of sense. It's pretty sweet. I like that setup.
And you can tailor it to your style and whatever works for you. There's, like you say, a lot of ways to skin the cat.
Yeah.
That is a sweet setup. On most of these here, I guess, aside from the shotgun, I'm seeing suppressors.
Yes.
How are you using those? Why are you using those? What do you like about them?
I like everything about them, if I'm honest.
They're the best.
That is the answer.
They're the best.
Yeah. So when I'm out on my own or with clients, I have not yet found a downside to them. The piece about making your rifle longer and heavier, there is that. But it's far outweighed by all the benefits. So something like I
don't think you're too worried about long and heavy with that 24-inch AR-10 there.
Well,
and
there is this, and then I've got a great big long can on the end of it too. So it's not something I'm riding around with on my lap and yanking out a truck window. So when I'm walking into stands, and this was something I should have shown earlier when I was up here too, but when I'm walking into stands, I keep my rifle on my tripod. You don't have to. You could sling it, carry it in, whatever, but they're built with a good positive attachment to that tripod. I carry them in on the tripod.
Okay.
Scan as you walk in, and if I see something out there, I can set the legs down easy, push it up off my shoulder, and be ready to shoot. But in that configuration with that ball tight, I just come up underneath the magazine and pick it up and carry it with the legs in the air.
Oh, sweet.
Just like that.
I like it.
As for the suppressors, do you find, I'm thinking of benefits, like you're not going to piss off any neighbors or people whose land you're on who said, yeah, you can hunt coyotes on my place. Just, try not to wake up my kids with your boom.
And we were talking about kind of the stigma, like, you hear a shot at night, you assume something's
nefarious,
yeah. Right? Where I guess, you're kind of, number one, that's not what you're doing. And number two, I guess you're kind of able to,
right.
Lower profile, lower disruption to people. Like I said, you're not waking somebody up.
You don't want to waste the police time with, they get called on you and in the middle of the night, there's gunshots, or something. Right. So there's that.
Yes. But just the hearing protection side of it. Mm-hmm. And if you're hunting with friends or you're hunting with buddies, muzzle brakes are a lot of fun at the range. But if you're...
Are they even, though?
Well...
Maybe.
But, when guys are hunting in a group like this together, it's a pretty nasty deal, especially at night. It can be pretty obnoxious. But yeah, so, these do mitigate a little bit of recoil. It's not to the point that a brake does, but they mitigate some recoil and help to keep things a little bit flatter on target and be able to see your impacts and that kind of thing while you're shooting. So that's pretty neat. But beyond that, the response that I'm seeing in the animals downrange is well worth it by itself. And, it changes the perceived direction that the shot came from being downrange. And, beyond that, it changes the tone, it changes the volume. And, I don't know exactly what goes through their head when the shot rings, but is it registering to them as a gunshot?
Yeah.
And how long, I guess, before a suppressed gunshot registers to them as a gunshot, as suppressors are growing in popularity and things like that. But at this point right now, and in my area, getting out and rolling with these suppressors a couple of years ago, I'm seeing some really strange responses out of these animals that I never saw before suppressors, where we walk into a stand and set up and start scanning, and there's a coyote at 45 yards poking around in the grass, kiss him out into the open, thwop. And that kissing that I was doing to try to get this guy out in the open got the attention of a pair out there at 400 or 500 yards, and they're still coming. Yeah. They weren't phased.
Crazy.
That is crazy. Crazy cool.
I don't want to ever do it, but I also want to figure out what it sounds like to be downrange of a suppressor. I don't know how to make that work.
I'd say let's not try that hard.
Mark, I trust you. No, never mind. Never mind.
This is like, talk about a trust fall.
So I need an apple.
Yeah, exactly.
No, that's super cool. The advantage, we talk about suppressors all the time. The advantages are just...
Well, and it's not that it's not loud. And it's not that coyotes won't spook, and it's not that that pair still coming in at 500 yards isn't going to spook 90% of the time, but that would not have happened before.
Right.
And there's still a good supersonic crack, and like I said, we're moving some scalding velocities with those bullets. It's a distinct rifle crack when it shoots. But, from your perspective where you're standing, it's a heck of a lot more enjoyable. The bolt guns more so than the gas guns, as you've got chamber pop and that kind of thing to go along with it. But man, I would say that in the last year, I've probably put 15 more in the truck based on having a can.
Oh, wow. Yeah.
Right on.
Yeah.
So, yeah, conservatively speaking, 15 more. But, yeah, it's crazy.
Mm-hmm. That's awesome.
We talked a lot, or at least a fair amount, about shooting off a tripod.
Mm-hmm.
And I'm looking at this collar here, this e-collar, that is also on a tripod. And I guess, Jim, this will be my blatant drop on our recently released tripod line, which is very cool. So I suggest anybody who needs a tripod, check them out. But this is an application that I haven't seen before for use of a tripod. So maybe tell us a little bit what you have going on here with this e-collar and the why behind that.
Sure. So getting the collar up off the ground is very, very important to help the sound carry and to just keep it out of the dirt and the mud and the elements, that kind of thing too. But if you get them up off the ground, this 2 feet, you can place that collar into spots that the coyotes can't see. So as they're coming in, if you have a depression out in the field or a depression in the woods, you can set that collar low, still let that sound get out of there like it would be otherwise, elevating it off the ground a little bit, and using those terrain features like that. If the coyotes can't physically see the sound and there's enough mystery about where that sound is, they're going to come right to the edge of that depression to look in there.
Mm-hmm. Okay.
And you can basically drop a tarp on the downwind side of that call on the rim of that depression. That's where your coyote's going to come. And, being able to put this wherever you want to build that X off of, whether it's a tall bit of grass or a fence row or something like that, you might be able to hang this thing out of a tree without a tripod. But if I want to put it out in the middle of a field and get it up off the ground and get it out there, a cute little tripod like this, that back in the early days I was using this to shoot off of, but a cute little tripod like this, I throw it on my shoulder and away we go, and I set it down wherever I want to set it, and if I want to elevate it to be this high off the ground, I can do that. If I want to keep it nice and short and on the ground, I can do that too. I can set my coyote decoy right over the top of this thing and have it out there in the middle of the field. I can do a lot of things with it.
Yeah.
There's a lot of collars out there that offer motion decoys and things right on the tripod. Just a handy way to set it up.
Very cool.
Sweet.
I like your little sling that you got on there too.
Yeah. It's pretty fancy.
I like the blood on the collar. Is that what that is?
That is.
Right on.
Yes.
She gets used.
It's a real one.
That's authentic right there.
Oh yeah. Awesome. Well, I dig this. I feel like for somebody who's looking into try to do the night hunting thing, there's definitely a lot of good info there, and it is encouraging to me too, thinking about it, because I'm like, well, understanding that you don't necessarily have to go the just crazy expensive route of getting every last bit of night vision equipment, as cool as that might be, and night vision and thermal and all that stuff, as cool as it might be, because you kind of feel like a badass rolling around with that stuff. I have rolled around with it before, borrowed from someone else. At least a lack of it doesn't mean that you can't do it.
Correct.
I'd probably follow that with, but be careful, because once you probably do get into it, then you'll find yourself saving your pennies to get more into it.
Yeah.
Yep, it's a disease. And then, along with that, to hunt within those limitations.
Yep.
to be able to do it safely and ethically, do it within those limitations. If all you have to hunt with is a shotgun, do it within those limitations. And likewise, if all you've got to hunt with is a 22 mag, do it within those limitations.
Yep.
So, yeah, there's a lot of things there, and again, your self-control, trying to keep things ethical, doing your best to keep things safe in everything that you're doing hunting-wise, but that all gets stacked and elevated when you take it after dark.
Yep.
Big time.
Makes a lot of sense.
Awesome. Well, Matt, thank you again so much. Really appreciate it.
It's my pleasure.
Been awesome. For those of you out there who are interested in this stuff yourself, drop. I guess if people have more questions, are you on Instagram?
I'm not on Instagram, but I am on Facebook and Facebook Messenger if somebody wants to reach out to me. Matt McHugh is the name.
Or if they hit us up, we can hit you up, and it can be like a game of telephone.
Perfect.
Or if they got a problem coyote on their place, or
that too.
Yeah. Yeah, and I'm an open book. So if there's something I can direct you to, as far as equipment, it's likely I've tried it, or I know somebody that's got it, or has run it, or whatever. But beyond that, as far as styles of calling, and between the two podcasts, I feel we've laid a pretty good groundwork for people to go out and build off of. But again, there's not a wrong way to do it, and what I do is my style. I don't expect that anybody pick up my style and run with it, but if they want to take aspects of it and give it a try, if they're in a slump or hitting a dry spell or whatever, I'd certainly happy to help them answer any of those questions and see if I can get them on the right track. But
sweet,
yeah,
awesome.
Can we sign this one off with another sweet vocal call? Are you down for that?
Yeah.
What's your favorite? Do you have a favorite? Is that like a dumb question to ask? What's your favorite one?
Oh, probably that the coyote fight from the first one, I would say.
Oh, if anybody hasn't heard that one yet, can you do that one again?
Sure.
That's awesome.
Sure.
Okay, here we go. Woo! Oh man, if you're not juiced up and ready to go, if you're listening to this at the beginning of your day, now I don't know what. Check your pulse or something. That is awesome.
Not a better way to cap this one off.
Whew, thank you very much, sir.
Yes, thank you, Matt.
All right.
You're very welcome. Thank you, guys.
Signing off.
Signing off. Bye, everyone.
Bye.
Gosh, that is awesome.
Ugh.
Man.
That
like-
high pitched part is just.
Yeah.
I don't even know how you make that.
You gotta
noise.
get like in the center of a huddle before a football game or something.
Inhale. So
At the minimum, you'll just frighten the other team to leave.
Right.
And like the difference in those the barks from the soft barks in the howl is exhale versus inhale.
Okay.
And like buck grunts, inhale, things like that. I mean, but it changes the physiology of your throat while you're sucking in versus pushing out.
Sure.
Or whatever pinches your vocal cords in a different way. So.
Do you find that you actually end up by practicing that? Like I've made elk calls by inhaling, but then after a while, like I'm like a little tired and like my body kind of doesn't want to do that anymore.
Yep.
Is that actually something you can exercise and build more stamina?
Absolutely.
Interesting. Okay.
Yep. And I was saying, like, as far as the sounds being taxing, the fight seems like it would be, but it's not.
Okay.
I don't understand.
It does totally. Like when I hear that, I'm like, dude, I'm surprised you can still talk.
Right.
But of all the sounds that I do, I think the crow call is the most taxing, and for whatever reason, and it's not that aggressive, but. And it just seems to pinch things tighter, or stretch.
It definitely requires a lot of the more like raspy, guttural, vibratory stuff because it's got that.
Yeah.
Gosh, that was a good one.
That was really good. It didn't, but interestingly enough, though, like it didn't look that taxing. Like it looks like you're just kind of like putting it out there. Like you weren't. There wasn't a ton of crazy volume in there. You weren't like
Yep.
Yeah.
Well.
All right, that'll wrap it up for this episode of the Vortex Nation podcast. Thanks, everybody, for listening. hit that subscribe button so you can always stay up to date on the latest happenings over here at the Vortex Nation podcast. You can also follow us on Instagram at Vortex Nation Podcast. Again, everybody, thanks and happy hunting and shooting. We appreciate it. Have a good one.